The man who stumbled off the westbound train bore no resemblance to the soldier who had marched away 3 years prior, except for the scar that carved a silver crescent beneath his left eye, a mark that made Lyra Stormwind's breath catch in. Her throat like a bird trapped in winter glass. She had waited on this platform every Tuesday for 18 months, clutching a faded daguerreotype against her chest, watching strangers emerge from the steam and smoke. But this stranger, this hollow-eyed phantom in a tattered blue coat, stared through her as if she were morning mist, as if 3 years of marriage and 1,000 whispered promises had never existed at all. Elric, the name escaped her lips. Like a prayer to an absent god, he paused, one boot on the platform, one still on the train's iron step. Something flickered behind those storm-gray eyes. She had once known better than her own reflection. "I'm sorry, miss. Do we?" His voice carried the same deep timbre that had once read poetry to her by candlelight, but it held no recognition, no warmth. "Have we met before?" The photograph trembled in her hands. Their wedding day, captured in sepia tones 2 months before Fort Sumter fell. There she stood in her grandmother's ivory dress, radiant beside a young man whose smile could have lit the darkest hollow. That man had written her letters every week until the silence began. That man had carved their initials into the old oak behind her father's farm. That man had promised to return to her, whole and unbroken. This man studied her face like she was a puzzle missing half its pieces. "My name is Elric Thornvale," he said carefully, as if testing the weight of his own identity. "The doctors at the hospital, they told me I might encounter people from my past. People I can't remember." He stepped fully onto the platform, and she noticed the careful way he moved, favoring his right leg. "They said a shell burst near our position. Said I was found 3 days later, half buried in mud, speaking French to a dead horse." Lyra's hand flew to her mouth. She had imagined 100 different homecomings, joyful reunions, difficult conversations about the things war carves away from a man's soul. But she had never imagined this, standing before her husband as if they were strangers meeting at a church social. "You wrote to me," she whispered, pulling a bundle of letters from her reticule. His handwriting, bold and slanted, filled page after page, every week for 2 years. "You told me about the mud and the music the men would sing around their fires. You told me you dreamed of our kitchen garden, of the way morning light falls across our bed." He accepted the letters with the hesitance of a man handling a coiled snake. His fingers, those same long fingers that had traced promises along her skin, trembled as he unfolded the first page. She watched his eyes move across words he had written but could not remember writing, across endearments that meant nothing to him now. "My dearest heart," he read aloud, his voice catching. "The captain says we march to Antietam tomorrow. But tonight I close my eyes and see you hanging laundry in the meadow behind Thompson's mill. The way the wind catches your hair like spun gold. The way you laugh when the sheets tangle around your ankles." He looked up sharply. "I wrote this. September 15th, 1862. She had memorized the date of every letter, could recite his words like scripture. "You drew a little sketch of a wildflower in the margin. Said it reminded you of the ones we picked on. Our first walk together." His thumb found the faded pencil marks, a simple daisy, drawn with the careful attention of a man trying to hold onto something beautiful in an ugly world. "I don't remember any of it." The confession came out rough, almost angry. Not the flower, not the walk, not. His gaze traveled her face, lingering on details that should have been dear to him. "Not you." The train whistle shrieked behind them, a sound that seemed to come from the very depths of hell. Other passengers hurried past, weary farmers, women in black mourning clothes, children who stared too long at Elric's scarred face. But Lyra barely noticed them. Her world had narrowed to this moment, this man who wore her husband's body like an ill-fitting coat. "The house is just as you left it," she said, desperate to find some thread that might draw him back to himself. "Your books are still stacked beside your chair. Your mother's quilt is still folded at the foot of our bed. I kept everything exactly. Our bed." The question cut through her words like a cavalry saber. Heat flooded her cheeks. "We've been married 3 years, Elric. Since June of 1861. He studied the photograph again, holding it closer to catch the afternoon light. In the image, his younger self gazed at her with unmistakable devotion, one hand resting protectively on her waist, the other clasped with hers. "You're very beautiful," he said finally, and the clinical way he said it, as if commenting on a painting in a museum, made her heart crack clean through. "Do you remember nothing? Not even fragments?" Something passed across his features then, quick as summer lightning. "Sometimes I dream of yellow flowers. And there's a voice, a woman's voice, singing something soft. But when I wake," he shrugged, a gesture that somehow conveyed the weight of an entire lost life. The station master called the final boarding warning. The train would leave soon, carrying its cargo of strangers toward whatever futures awaited them. But Elric Thornvale would stay here, in this town that should have felt like home, but clearly felt like foreign territory. "Will you come with me?" Lyra asked, though her voice barely rose above the engine's rumble. "To our house. Maybe if you see familiar things." He hesitated, one hand still gripping the bundle of letters, the other hanging loose at his side. The man in the photograph would have swept her into his arms by now, would have kissed away her tears and whispered reassurances against her hair. This man looked at her like she was offering to lead him into a wolf's den. But finally, slowly, he nodded. Yes, they walked away from the platform together. Two strangers bound by vows only one of them remembered. Neither noticed the figure watching. From the shadows beside the freight car, a figure whose scarred hands clenched into fists at the sight of Elric Thornvale walking free under the afternoon sun. The walk to their farmhouse stretched 3 miles through rolling meadows that had once felt like paradise to Lyra. Now each familiar landmark, the bent willow where they'd carved their names, the stone bridge where he'd first kissed her, the weathered gate post he'd mended with his own hands, seemed to mock her with memories he couldn't share. Elric walked beside her in careful silence, his gray eyes scanning the countryside like a soldier expecting ambush. "You built that fence the summer before you enlisted," she ventured, pointing to a line of split rails that bordered the marsh field. "Property. Said it would keep old Henderson's cattle from wandering onto our land." He studied the fence with the same detached interest he'd shown the wedding photograph. "It's well-crafted work." His voice carried no pride, no recognition of his own skilled hands. "Whoever built it knew what he was about. Whoever built it." The words hit her like physical blows. This man spoke of his former self as if discussing a stranger, a ghost who had once inhabited his skin and left behind only shadows and scars. The house came into view as they crested Miller's Hill, a modest 2-story frame dwelling with blue shutters and a wraparound porch where morning glories climbed toward the eaves. Smoke curled from the kitchen chimney, and golden afternoon lights spilled through windows she had kept spotless in hope of this homecoming. It should have been a moment of triumph, of healing. Instead, it felt like leading a condemned man to his execution. Elric stopped at the front gate, his hand resting on the familiar latch his fingers had worked 1,000 times before. "It's a fine house," he said carefully. "Clean, well-tended." "It's our house," Lyra whispered, though the words felt hollow now. How could it be their home when only one of them remembered building a life within its walls? She led him up the porch steps, past the rocking chair where he used to read aloud from newspapers, past the window box where she'd planted the herbs he loved. The front door opened with the same gentle squeak it had always made, and she watched his face for any flicker of recognition. Nothing. He entered their home like a polite visitor, careful not to disturb anything, touching nothing without permission. The parlor remained exactly as he'd left it, his leather-bound books of poetry stacked beside his favorite chair, his pipe resting in its wooden stand, his mother's sampler hanging above the mantelpiece. Lyra had dusted these relics weekly, preserving them like artifacts in a shrine. Now they seemed to accuse her of foolishness, of clinging to a dead man's possessions. "May I?" Elric gestured toward the bookshelf. She nodded, watching as he pulled down a volume of Tennyson, the same book he'd read to her during their courtship. His fingers found a pressed flower marking a particular page, the daisy from their first walk together, now brittle as ancient parchment. He read silently, his lips moving slightly, and for a moment hope fluttered in her chest like a caged bird. "Come into the garden, Maud," he quoted softly. "For the black bat, night, has flown." He looked up, something almost like recognition flickering in his eyes. "This verse, it feels familiar, like an echo of something I should remember." "You recited those lines to me the night you proposed," Lyra breathed. We were walking in my father's orchard, and you said poetry could capture feelings that ordinary words couldn't hold. But even as she spoke, the moment passed. The light in his eyes dimmed, and he closed the book with a soft snap. I'm sorry. It's gone again. Like trying to catch smoke with bare hands. A knock at the front door interrupted them. Sharp, insistent. Raps that made Elric stiffen like a hunting dog catching a scent. Lyra frowned. Few people visited unannounced, especially so late in the afternoon. She opened the door to find Dr. Garrick Ironmore, the town's physician, but his usual gentle demeanor had been replaced by something urgent, almost frightened. Mrs. Thornvale. He removed his hat, his weathered hands trembling slightly. I heard. Elric had returned. I came as soon as I could manage. Dr. Ironmore, how wonderful that you. Is he here? The doctor's eyes darted past her, searching the shadowed hallway. I need to speak with him. With both of you. It concerns his condition. Lyra led him into the parlor where Elric stood rigid by the fireplace, every muscle taut with wariness. The two men studied each other in silence, the doctor's face grave with knowledge, the patient's blank with loss. You don't remember me either, do you, son? Dr. Ironmore asked gently. Should I? I delivered you into this world 32 years ago. Set your broken arm when you fell from Thompson's barn. Stitched up that gash on your forehead when you tangled with Henderson's bull. The doctor's voice carried decades of affection. And I treated you for fever the week before you left for the war. Elric touched the crescent scar beneath his eye unconsciously. The hospital doctors said the head wound caused my memory loss. That it might return gradually, or... He didn't finish the sentence. That's what I need to discuss with you. Dr. Ironmore glanced at Lyra, then back to Elric. I received a telegram today from Dr. Whitfield at the military hospital in Washington. He wanted to inform me of your condition, professional courtesy, and such. But there was something else. Something that doesn't make sense. The room fell silent except for the tick of the mantel clock and the distant lowing of cattle in the evening fields. Lyra felt a chill run down her spine, the kind of premonition that comes when the world is about to shift beneath your feet. According to their records, Dr. Ironmore continued slowly. You were treated for your injuries and released 6 months ago. But here's the peculiar thing. They have no record of where you went after discharge. You simply vanished from their sight until you appeared on that train today. 6 months. Lyra's voice came out as a strangled whisper. But Elric, where have you been? What happened during those 6 months? Elric's face had gone white as winter snow. His hand moved to his temple, rubbing circles as if trying to massage memories from reluctant flesh. There's nothing. Just fragments. A woman's voice singing. The smell of wood smoke. And he hesitated, his eyes growing distant. A man who looked like me. Exactly like me. But that can't be real. Head injuries cause hallucinations, don't they, doctor? Dr. Ironmore exchanged a meaningful look with Lyra. Son, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Have you looked at yourself in a mirror since you've been home? I know. Why would that matter? Without a word, Lyra fetched the hand mirror from her dressing table upstairs. She placed it in Elric's hands, watching his face as he stared at his own reflection for the first time in their home. What she saw there made her blood turn to ice-watered. He was studying his features like a stranger's, touching the scar, running fingers through his dark hair, examining the shape of his jaw. This isn't right, he whispered. This face, it's familiar, but it doesn't feel like mine. It's as if I'm wearing someone else's skin. Dr. Ironmore leaned forward intently. Elric, I've known you since you drew your first breath. I've seen you grow from boy to man, and I can tell you with absolute certainty, that is your face, your body, your scar. But something about you is different. The way you hold yourself, the rhythm of your speech, even the way you breathe. It's subtle, but unmistakable. What are you suggesting? Lyra demanded, though part of her already knew, had sensed it from the moment he'd stepped off that train. I'm suggesting, the doctor said carefully, that we may be dealing with something far more complex than simple memory loss. There are cases in medical literature, rare but documented, of severe trauma causing what some call dissociation of identity. The mind, attempting to protect itself from unbearable memories, sometimes creates entirely new patterns of being. Elric set the mirror down with shaking hands. You're saying I'm not myself, that I'm some sort of imposter. I'm saying you're Elric Thornvale, but perhaps not the same Elric Thornvale who marched away to war. Trauma can reshape a man as surely as fire reshapes iron. The question is, what happened during those 6 missing months that was so terrible your mind chose to bury not just the memory, but the very self who experienced it? The three of them sat in heavy silence as shadows lengthened across the parlor floor. Outside, a mockingbird ran through its repertoire of stolen songs, each melody borrowed from other birds, other lives. Lyra stared at the man who wore her husband's face and wondered if she was a widow after all, if the man she'd married had died somewhere in those lost months, leaving behind only this shell, this stranger who carried his body like inherited. Closed at a sudden sound from the kitchen made them all freeze, the slow, deliberate squeak of the back door opening. Lyra's heart hammered against her ribs. She had locked that door herself before walking to the station. "Stay here," Elric whispered, moving toward the kitchen with the fluid grace of a trained soldier. Whatever else he'd lost, his military instincts remained sharp as a Damascus blade. But as he reached the doorway, a voice called out from the shadows, a voice that made Dr. Ironmore gasp and Lyra's world tilt sideways. "Hello, brother," the voice said, identical in every way to Elric's own. "I see you found your way home at last." The man who emerged from the kitchen shadows wore Elric's face like a death mask carved by a master sculptor. Every line identical, every feature perfectly matched, yet somehow fundamentally wrong. His clothes hung in tatters, stained with mud and what might have been blood, and his eyes held a darkness that seemed to swallow light rather than reflect it. "Dear God," Dr. Ironmore breathed, his medical bag slipping from nerveless fingers. To clatter on the hardwood floor, Lyra felt the world spinning beneath her feet. Two identical faces stared at each other across her kitchen doorway, one confused and lost, the other burning with terrible knowledge. The newcomer's smile held no warmth, only the sharp edge of broken glass. "You don't remember me, do you?" the stranger asked, studying the man who shared his features. "Of course you don't. That was always the plan, let you forget everything. Ugly, everything that would keep you awake screaming in the dark. Leave me to carry all the weight while you play at being innocent. Who are you?" Elric's voice cracked like a boy's, but his stance remained that of a soldier ready for battle. "I'm the part of you that remembers Andersonville Prison." The stranger's laugh was bitter as wormwood. "I'm the part that recalls watching our bunkmate die of dysentery while the guards placed bets on how long his agony would last. I'm the brother who clawed through mud and corpses when the prison walls fell, who killed 3 men with his bare hands just to taste freedom again." Dr. Ironmore stepped forward, his physician's instincts overriding his shock. "This is medically impossible. I've read about cases of split personality, but never a physical manifestation. Physical." The dark-eyed double turned his attention to the doctor, and his grin revealed teeth stained red. "You think I'm flesh and blood, old man? You think trauma splits a soul so neatly that pieces can walk around independent of each other?" He raised his hand, and Lyra saw with horror that it was translucent, like smoke given form. "Mother Clemence's garden, behind the convent in Toulouse," the shadow hissed. "Where we hid for 3 months after escaping. Where the nuns fed us soup and asked no questions about the blood under our fingernails. Where you fell in love with that French girl. What was her name? Muriel? Such a pretty thing, with hair like spun gold and a voice that could make angels weep." "Stop." The word tore from Elric's throat like a confession pulled by hot irons, but the shadow pressed on, circling him like a predator. "She nursed you back to health, didn't she? Sang those lullabies while you recovered from the fever. Made you forget about your wife back home. Made you believe you could start fresh, be someone new. You lived with her for 6 months, sharing her bed, learning her language, planning a future that had no room for the life you'd left behind." Lyra felt her heart shatter into pieces smaller than dust. The man she'd waited for, prayed for, dreamed of through 3 years of loneliness. He had found love in another woman's arms. He had chosen to forget her, chosen to build a new life on the grave of their marriage. "That's not. I wouldn't." Elric's protests came out weak, unconvincing even to himself. "Oh, but you did." The shadow's voice dripped with poisonous satisfaction. "You were so happy there, so free from the weight of what you'd done to survive. Until the day you saw her face in the market. Another prisoner from Andersonville. A man who recognized you despite your new French clothes and your practiced accent. He spoke your real name loud enough for Muriel to hear, told everyone within earshot about the coward who'd betrayed his own men for an extra ration of wormy bread. Dr. Ironmore made a small sound of horror, but Lyra stood frozen, watching. Her husband crumble beneath the weight of memories that belonged to him, yet felt like someone else's sins. She looked at you differently after that. The shadow continued, his form growing more solid, more real, as if fed by Elric's anguish. Saw the killer behind the lover's mask. So you ran again, left her sleeping in that narrow convent bed, fled back to America with nothing but the clothes on your back and a heart full of poison. But you couldn't bear to carry those memories home to your sweet, faithful wife. So you gave them to me. How? Elric demanded, tears streaming down his face. How is any of this possible? Guilt is a powerful alchemist, the shadow replied. It can transmute shame into madness, transform a man's soul into something unrecognizable. You wanted so desperately to be worthy of her love, he gestured toward Lyra, that you tore away every piece of yourself that might prove otherwise. But shadows have substance, brother. They don't simply disappear when you stop looking at them. Lyra found her voice. At last, though it came out broken and strange. The man I married, is he gone forever? Both figures turned to her, one wearing guilt like a burial shroud, the other radiating cold satisfaction. The shadow spoke first. The man you married died in Andersonville prison, girl. What stands before you now is just the pretty pieces, the parts he thought you'd want to keep. But a man divided against himself cannot stand. Eventually, one half must consume the other. No. Elric straightened, something fierce kindling in his gray eyes. I won't let you have her. I may not remember loving her, but I can see what she means, what she deserves. Whatever I did in that prison, whatever sins I've committed, I won't let them touch her. The shadow's laughter was like breaking glass. Brave words from a hollow man. But tell me, brother, how do you fight an enemy that lives inside your own heart? As if summoned by his words, the temperature in the room plummeted. Frost began forming on the windows despite the summer evening's warmth. Dr. Ironmore's breath came out in visible puffs as he backed toward the door, his medical training warring with supernatural dread. We need to leave, he whispered urgently. Whatever this is, it's beyond my skills to treat. But Lyra stepped forward instead, moving between the two identical figures. Her wedding photograph lay forgotten on the parlor table, but she carried its memory in her heart. The image of two young people drunk on love and possibility, unmarked by war or betrayal or the terrible choices that survival sometimes demands. I don't care what you did, she said quietly, looking into Elric's tormented eyes. I don't care about the French girl or the prison or the men who died. I only care about the man standing before me now, trying to protect me from his own demons. Sweet child, the shadow purred, reaching out with fingers that felt like ice against her cheek. You have no idea what he's capable of. Would you still love him if you knew he strangled a wounded boy for a crust of moldy bread? Would you warm his bed if you'd seen him weep like a broken thing while another man's wife pleased him in a foreign tongue? Yes, Lyra said simply, and the word rang through the room like a bell. Because love isn't about deserving or earning or being worthy. It's about choosing someone every day, shadows and all. It's about believing that redemption is always possible, that no sin is too great for forgiveness to bridge. The shadow recoiled, as if she'd struck him. Impossible. No love is that pure, that foolish. Mine is, she said, and turned to take Elric's trembling hands in hers. Ours is. For a moment, the kitchen hung suspended between realities, shadow and substance. Memory and forgetting, love and despair balanced on a knife's edge. Then Elric squeezed her fingers, and something shifted in the air around them. I choose her, he whispered, his voice growing stronger with each word. I choose love over shame, hope over despair. Whatever you are, whatever hold you have on me, I reject you. The shadow screamed then, a sound like wind through a graveyard, and began to dissolve like smoke in a hurricane. But as he faded, his final words echoed through the room with the weight of prophecy. You cannot destroy me, brother. I am you, and you are me. And when the moon turns dark tomorrow night, when the anniversary of your greatest shame arrives, I will return to claim what is mine. Blood bloomed across Elric's white shirt like dark roses unfurling, the stains spreading with each labored breath. Dr. Ironmore dropped to his knees beside them, his weathered hands already reaching for his medical bag while his mind struggled to process what defied every law of nature he'd studied. "Help me get him to the settee," the doctor commanded, his voice steady despite the impossibility of treating a wound that shouldn't exist. "Lyra, fetch clean linens and hot water." Whatever that thing was, it's left him with more than just memories. They carried Elric to the parlor where lamplight revealed the true extent of the damage. His shirt, when cut away, showed 3 parallel gashes across his ribs, claw marks that looked fresh as morning dew but carried the putrid smell of an old battlefield. Dr. Ironmore cleaned the wounds with steady hands, though his face had gone gray as winter ash. "These cuts are weeks old by the look of the infection," he muttered, "but they're bleeding like they were made moments ago. It's as if time itself has gone mad." He glanced up at Lyra, who pressed clean cloth against the deepest gash. "In 40 years of medicine, I've never seen anything like this." Elric stirred on the settee, his eyes fluttering open to fix on Lyra's face. The shadow spoke truth. He whispered, his voice thick with pain and shame. "I can feel the memories now, seeping back like poison through a cracked dam. The boy I killed for bread was no older than 16. He begged me to let him live, promised he had a sweetheart waiting back in Ohio." "Hush," Lyra murmured, stroking his fevered brow. "Save your strength." "No." His hand caught hers with surprising force. "You need to know what manner of man you're choosing to love." In Andersonville, when the guards offered extra rations for information about escape plans, I gave them names. Good men died because of my cowardice, because I was too weak to starve. With honor. Dr. Ironmore paused in his ministrations. "Son, war does terrible things to men's souls. Survival makes beasts of us all, and in France." Elric continued as if the doctor hadn't spoken. "I let Muriel believe I was a hero, a brave soldier wounded in noble battle. I built our love on lies, let her tend wounds earned through betrayal, rather than courage. When that man recognized me in the marketplace, when she learned the truth." His voice broke like glass, the look in her eyes, like watching an angel discover she'd been kissing the devil. Outside, thunder rumbled across the evening sky, though no clouds had been visible when the sun set. The temperature continued to drop, frost now covering the windows in intricate patterns that looked almost like skeletal hands reaching inward. Whatever supernatural forces Elric's fractured soul had unleashed, they were growing stronger as night deepened. "These cuts," Dr. Ironmore said quietly, studying the wounds with professional concern. "They match the pattern of marks I've seen on prisoners who tried to claw their way out of cells. Did someone attack you during those missing months?" Elric's laugh held no humor. "Someone? No, doctor. These are my own handiwork, carved into my flesh during the darkest night of my cowardice. The anniversary my shadow spoke of, it was the night I tried to tear the guilt from my own skin, tried to bleed out the shame rather than carry it home to her." He struggled to sit up despite Lyra's gentle resistance. "It was September 21st, 6 months ago. I'd been living with Muriel for 3 months, playing at being a new man, when the nightmare started coming every time I closed my eyes. The faces of the men who died because of my betrayal, the boy whose neck I broke for a piece of stale bread. I couldn't escape them, couldn't forget, so I—" He gestured to the wounds. "I tried to carve them out of myself with a broken bottle. Dear God," Dr. Ironmore breathed. "But pain couldn't wash away guilt, and blood couldn't buy forgiveness. So I did something else, something the old women in the convent said was possible if a man's shame was deep enough, his need great enough. I spoke to the darkness and asked it to take my memories, to let me forget everything that would make me unworthy of love." Lyra felt ice forming in her veins. "Elric, what exactly did you do?" "I made a bargain," he whispered. "Split myself in two, gave all my darkness to a shadow twin, and kept only the light for myself. The price was simple. I could live as a clean man for 1 full year, could come home and try to rebuild what I'd destroyed. But if I couldn't earn redemption in that time, if I couldn't prove myself worthy of forgiveness, the shadow would return, to claim everything, body, soul, and the woman I love. Thunder crashed overhead with unnatural violence, rattling the windows and making the lamplight flicker. In that brief darkness, shapes seemed to move in the corners of the room, twisted figures that might have been men or might have been nightmares given form. 1 year, Dr. Ironmore repeated slowly. And when does that year end? Tomorrow night, September 21st. Elric's eyes met Lyra's, and she saw in them the terrible weight of a man who had gambled with forces beyond his understanding. At midnight, when the anniversary arrives, my shadow will return with all the demons I tried to leave behind. And this time, he won't be content to simply remind me of my sins. He'll take my place entirely, become the only version of Elric Thornvale that exists. The temperature plummeted further, and their breath now came out in white puffs. Ice began forming on the inside of the windows, creating bizarre patterns that looked like screaming faces pressed against the glass. From somewhere in the walls came a sound like scratching, as if dozens of fingernails were clawing at the wooden frame of the house. "We have to leave," Dr. Ironmore said urgently, helping Elric to his feet. "Whatever forces you've awakened, they're strongest here, in this place where you and your wife built your life together. We need to find consecrated ground, somewhere the shadows can't follow." "No." Lyra stepped between them and the door, her chin raised in defiance of both supernatural terror and common sense. "I won't run from our home. I won't let whatever darkness he's carrying drive us from the life we built together." "Lyra, you don't understand," Elric pleaded. "The thing you saw earlier was just the beginning. Tomorrow night, every evil I've ever committed will manifest in this house. The men I betrayed, the boy I murdered, the trust one shattered, they'll all come looking for payment. And they won't be content with just my life. They'll take everything I love, starting with you." She crossed to the mantelpiece and took down an item she'd placed there on their wedding day, a small silver cross that had belonged to her grandmother, blessed by 3 generations of faithful women. "Then we'll face them together," she said simply. "My grandmother told me this cross was forged from silver that ran in streams beneath a monastery. She said it could hold back any darkness if the bearer's faith was strong enough. Silver and faith won't stop what's coming," Elric warned, but his voice carried a note of desperate hope. "Maybe not," Lyra admitted, fastening the chain around her neck. "But love might. You made your bargain in despair, believing yourself beyond redemption. But you've spent these months proving otherwise. You returned to me, chose truth over comfortable lies, faced your shadow rather than running from it. That has to count for something." The scratching in the walls grew louder, more frantic, as if whatever dwelt there was trying to claw its way into their conversation. Dr. Ironmore backed toward the center of the room, his medical bag clutched like a talisman against forces his science couldn't explain. "There's something else," Elric said, his voice barely audible above the supernatural cacophony. "The bargain I made, it requires a willing sacrifice. If someone I love offers themselves in my place, freely and without coercion, the shadow will accept that trade. It would spare me by taking them instead." "No." Lyra's response came swift and sharp as a blade. "I know what you're thinking, and I won't let you turn this into some noble sacrifice. We face this together, or not at all. You don't understand the kind of love I'm asking for," Elric said, reaching for her with shaking hands. "I'm asking you to love a murderer, a traitor, a man who abandoned his own wife's memory for the comfort of a stranger's bed. I'm asking you to risk your very soul for someone who doesn't deserve salvation. And I'm telling you," Lyra replied, catching his hands in hers, "that's exactly the kind of love worth giving. Not because you deserve it, but because love isn't about deserving. It's about choosing again and again to see the man you could become rather than the man you've been." Outside, the wind rose to a howl that sounded almost like voices, hundreds of them, crying out in languages both familiar and strange. The frost on the windows began forming words in multiple tongues: traitor, murderer, coward, abandoned, forgotten, unloved. But as Lyra pressed closer to Elric, her grandmother's cross catching the lamplight, new words began appearing: forgiven, redeemed, beloved, chosen, home. "It's starting," Dr. Ironmore whispered, pointing toward the clock on the mantelpiece. "Look at the time." The hands of the clock were moving backward, spinning in reverse as if time itself was unwinding. The date on the calendar began changing. Pages flipping of their own accord until September 21st appeared in bold black letters. The anniversary was arriving early, summoned by forces that cared nothing for mortal measurements of time. "Whatever happens," Lyra said, her voice steady despite the chaos building around them, "remember that you came home to me. Remember that you chose truth over comfort, love over fear. And remember that some bonds are stronger than any darkness, even the darkness we carry within ourselves." The lamplight flickered one final time and went out, plunging them into absolute blackness. In that darkness, footsteps echoed on the front porch, slow, deliberate, and accompanied by voices that spoke in unison. "Elric Thornvale, your year of grace is ended. Come and face your judgment." The figures that entered through the shattered doorway moved like smoke given substance. Confederate soldiers with bullet holes in their chests, Union prisoners bearing the hollow eyes of starvation, and at their center, a boy no older than 16 whose broken neck hung at an impossible angle. They filled the parlor with the cold of early graves and the stench of battlefield medicine, their voices joining in an accusation that made the very walls weep with condensation. "Murderer," they whispered in unison. "Betrayer," "Coward." Behind them came Elric's shadow self, no longer translucent but solid as corrupted flesh, his smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Did you think love could wash away blood?" he asked, gesturing to the spectral army at his back. "Did you believe pretty words could resurrect the dead?" Dr. Ironmore pressed himself against the far wall, his rational mind finally surrendering to forces beyond medical explanation. But Lyra stepped forward, her grandmother's silver cross blazing with sudden light that made the spirits hiss and recoil. "I believe," she said clearly, "that redemption is always possible for those who seek it with honest hearts." The boy with the broken neck turned his dead eyes toward her. "He strangled me for bread, woman, crushed my windpipe while I begged for mercy. What redemption covers such an act?" "The redemption," Lyra replied steadily, "of a man who chooses to carry that guilt rather than forget it, who comes home to face judgment rather than hiding in foreign lands. The redemption of acknowledgement, of genuine remorse, of a soul willing to change." The shadow Elric laughed, the sound like breaking bones. "Beautiful words from a beautiful fool, but debts of blood require blood to pay them. Your husband owes each of these men a life, and I've come to collect." "No," Elric said, stepping beside his wife despite the supernatural cold that threatened to freeze his very bones. "The debt is mine alone. Take me, but leave her out of this." "How noble," the shadow sneered. "But our bargain specified everything. You love. She chose to love a killer. Let her share a killer's fate." The spirits began to advance, their forms growing more solid with each step. But as they moved, Lyra did something unexpected. She began to sing. Her voice rose clear and sweet above the supernatural chaos, carrying a melody Elric recognized from dreams he'd thought were fantasies. "Sur le pont d'Avignon, Elon y danse, Elon y danse." The French lullaby that Muriel had sung to him during his fever, the song his shadow self had mentioned, now flowed from his wife's lips with perfect pronunciation. The spirits paused, confusion flickering across their spectral features. "How? Do you know that song?" Elric whispered. Lyra's eyes met his, and in them he saw not accusation but understanding. "Because I sought her out, found the convent where you'd hidden. Muriel told me everything, about your nightmares, your guilt, the way you wept when you spoke my name in your sleep. She loved you, Elric, but she knew you belonged elsewhere. She taught me the songs that comforted you so I could bring you home to yourself." The shadow's confident sneer faltered. "Impossible. You would never forgive." "I forgave him before I even met her," Lyra continued, still singing softly between words. "Love doesn't keep a ledger of wrongs. It doesn't demand perfection before offering grace. I went to France not to confront a rival, but to understand the woman who had shown kindness to my husband when he was lost." She turned to address the boy with the broken neck, her voice gentle as spring rain. "You died in terrible pain, and that was wrong. But punishing Elric now won't restore your life or ease your suffering. Some wounds can only be healed by letting them heal others." The boy's form flickered, becoming less solid. "What healing could come from my death?" The healing of a man who learned that survival without honor is its own kind of death, Lyra replied. The healing of a soul that chose to split itself rather than carry guilt home to those he loved. Your suffering taught him that some prices are too high to pay, even for life itself. One by one, the other spirits began to fade as well, not banished, but somehow released. The Confederate soldiers nodded to Elric with something approaching understanding. The Union prisoners, their hollow eyes now filled with a different kind of recognition, began to dissolve into motes of light that drifted upward like stars returning home. No, the shadow roared, his form beginning to crack like old leather. The bargain stands. He owes a debt of blood. Yes, Elric said quietly, I do. He pulled a knife from his belt, the same blade he'd carried through the war, now clean and sharp as his newly restored memory. But not the debt you think. Before anyone could stop him, he drew the knife across his palm, letting his blood drip onto the wooden floor of the home he'd shared with Lyra. I offer my blood freely, he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. Not as payment for crimes that can never be undone, but as seed for something new. Let my blood water this ground where love chose to grow despite darkness. Let it nourish forgiveness where hatred might have taken root. The drops of blood hit the floor and spread like water, but instead of staining the wood, they seemed to sink into it, disappearing as if the house itself was drinking them in. Where each drop fell, something miraculous happened. The frost on the windows began to melt, the supernatural cold lifted, and from between the floorboards, tiny green shoots began to emerge. Impossible, the shadow gasped, his form now cracking apart like a statue struck by lightning. Not impossible, Dr. Ironmore said softly, his scientific mind finally grasping a truth beyond science. Sacrificial. He's not paying for past sins. He's planting seeds for future grace. The boy with the broken neck smiled then, his features growing peaceful for the first time since death had claimed him. I forgive you, he whispered to Elric. Find a way to live that honors what my death taught you. As the last of the spirits faded into gentle light, the shadow Elric made one final desperate lunge toward Lyra. But the silver cross at her throat blazed with radiance that drove him back, and Elric stepped between them, no longer the confused stranger who had stepped off the train, but the complete man who had integrated both his light and darkness. You are part of me, he told his shadow, and I no longer reject you. But you do not control me. My guilt belongs to me, my memories belong to me, and my choices belong to me. I choose to remember everything, the good and the terrible, because that's what it means to be whole. The shadow looked at him with something that might have been respect. And if the guilt destroys you, then I'll carry it anyway, Elric replied. Because the alternative, forgetting the cost of my choices, would dishonor everyone who paid the price for my survival. With a sound like a sigh of wind through autumn leaves, the shadow dissolved, not banished but absorbed back into the man who had created him. Elric staggered as the integration completed itself, every memory flooding back. Andersonville, Muriel, the long journey home, and beneath it all, the unwavering love that had waited for him through everything. The green shoots continued to emerge from the floorboards, growing with impossible speed until the entire parlor floor was carpeted with new grass. And from that grass, as dawn light began to filter through the cleared windows, came the sweetest sight of all, tiny yellow roses, blooming in defiance of season and circumstance. The flowers from your dreams, Lyra breathed, kneeling beside them. Not dreams, Elric corrected, pulling her into his arms with hands that shook from more than cold. Memories. Of Muriel's garden, yes, but also of the roses you planted behind your father's house the day before our wedding. The ones you said would remind me of home no matter how far the war carried me. She looked up at him with eyes bright as morning. Stars. Do you remember now? Everything, everything, he confirmed, and kissed her with the passion of a man who had traveled through hell and found heaven waiting in his own front parlor. The good and the terrible, the shameful and the sacred. I remember that I love you more than my own life, and that some bonds are stronger than any darkness we might carry. Dr. Ironmore cleared his throat diplomatically. Perhaps I should be getting home. It appears my services are no longer needed here. As the sun fully rose, painting the sky in shades of hope and new beginnings. Elric and Lyra stood together in their transformed parlor, surrounded by impossible roses that bloomed from love's refusal to surrender to despair. The man who had returned with no memory had found something better than his old self. He had found wholeness, integration, and the courage to love despite his own imperfections. "Welcome home," Lyra whispered against his lips. "I never left," he replied, and this time, they both knew it was true. If this tale of love conquering darkness has touched your heart, dear friends, I humbly ask that you share it with those who might need reminding that redemption is always possible for honest souls. And do tell us in the comments below, from what corner of God's green earth are you watching this story unfold today?